Good morning, everybody. We are so excited to be here with Brad Washa. Am I saying that correctly?
You are, yes.
Awesome. Okay. And we are going to be talking all about wildfire and wildland management and things like that. If you're watching the recording, welcome again. And if you're watching live on Facebook, happy Monday. So we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. Brad, we like to start with kind of rapid fire questions, just like off the cuff. So tell us a little bit about where you grew up.
Well, I grew up in Mayville, Wisconsin, and Mayville's a small little farming, industry type community in about an hour northwest of Milwaukee. It's on the edge of the Horicon Marsh and the Horicon National Wildlife Refuge, and that's actually where I started getting my interest in natural resources. That and going out, my grandmother and grandfather lived on a lake, so we'd go out there on weekends. And on the Horicon National Wildlife Refuge, my first job was with the Youth Conservation Corps, and then with the Wisconsin DNR in northern Wisconsin, did youth conservation camps at Ernie Swift's. So, and our family would go up to a cottage up in northern Wisconsin on a lake up there. So, it's kind of where my roots start.
I was gonna say your whole like everything has been about conservation and what like you grew up in it. That's
Definitely, definitely.
awesome. All right, do you have any pets?
We have two dogs, Luca and Kiska. They're Samoyeds. They're 11 and 9 years old. So, yeah.
That's so fun. Okay, what would be your desert island books or movies?
You know, I don't do a lot of reading for fun. I read a lot of technical stuff, but I guess if I had to choose some books or movies, on Golden Pond, just because that kind of brings back memories to the lake that my grandparents were on, and my mom now lives there. And then a river runs through it, kind of ties me to the west. As far as Sand County Almanac also brings me back to my ties to central Wisconsin and all the Leopold's work. So.
That's awesome. Okay, let's talk about our favorite Aggie ice cream. I'm terrible. I don't actually like ice cream. I like Aggie ice cream and I'll eat it if it's like at an event, but I'm not gonna go for the ice cream. So what's your favorite flavor of Aggie ice cream?
Yeah, I know I'm the co-advisor for the USU Wildland Fire Club, and our president last year was graduating. It's like I kind of asked him that question. He's like, "I've never had Aggie ice cream, but I have, and I'd probably say Aggie Blue Mint. I think that's what it's called. At least it's
Yeah,
the blue colored mint flavored."
the classic one. All right, let's share one fun fact about you that people might not know.
So each spring, I continue to go back to the sixth grade camp that my public school did in Mayville, the Mayville. Uh, Sixth grade environmental education camp, and there I teach forestry. And then if the weather is good, we'll take the kids on night hikes, and I'll do whatever helps needed, washing dishes in the kitchen if that's required. So yeah, I've missed 2 years since sixth grade for
Oh
sixth
my
grade camp.
gosh.
In high school, I was a counselor there, and then in college, came back teaching survival and canoeing, and the last probably 10 years I've been teaching forestry there.
Wow. And you go back in the summer, so like June, July, or when is it?
It's usually end of April,
Oh,
sometimes
okay.
at the
That's good.
beginning of May. So it's part of their school year.
Oh my gosh, that's so fun. Okay,
Yeah.
and my last question, what's something that you do in your free time when you're not working?
Well, seeing that I live in Park City, I definitely ski and done ski patrol for a number of years, both at the canyons before Vail took over and then at Snow Basin. And then I love to hike and trail run and whether or not it's by myself or with the dogs. And then I'm a regular at Snyderville Basin Recreation Center. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, having grown up outside, basically, like it makes sense that your hobbies are also kind of like where you're gonna work. Like I said, I'm not a very good Utah because I don't like to ski. I don't like to snowboard. Um, I'm a I hibernate in the winter. I just cuddle up
Oh.
the good book and I just don't go outside. Okay. Well, I wanted to get into a little bit about your background in your career. Like, how did you even get started in something like this? And then maybe walk us through how you ended up at Utah State.
Um, well, as I knew I wanted to do something in natural resources as an undergrad and kind of toyed around with whether or not I did something with environmental education, camp management, communications and natural resources. And I started looking at actually going on to law school and doing environmental law. Between my junior and senior year of college, though, I went out to Mesa Verde and I started at the entrance gate there asking people. Then the fee was $5 to get into the park. But that's where I got my wildland fire training, the S-130 wildland firefighter training, and the S-190 introduction to fire behavior training. And about half that summer, I ended up being on fire and not at the entrance gate, which was a good thing. And the next year, I came back on the helitack crew, and after graduating at University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, ended up going to Colorado State in wildland fire science, and it kind of blossomed from there. Going from working with the National Park Service, then I switched over to the U.S. Forest Service in Colorado. When I graduated, I left federal service for a while and went to work for the Nature Conservancy on Long Island, New York. Then came back west because I really did miss the West, and took a job with the U.S. Forest Service in New Mexico, and then for about my last 23 years or so, was with the Bureau of Land Management in Oregon, and then 17 of those years were in Utah as the state fuel specialist.
Wow. So you have a ton of experience kind of all over the country as far as like it goes with managing wildland, right?
Definitely, yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. So you're here at USU now and you kind of mentioned that, but this is sort of a newer position, right? So what does your work entail with regards to extension?
Yeah, so when I was looking to retire, USU was looking at adding a new wildland fire specialist to their portfolio of extension folks in the Wildland Resources Department. And so I was kind of interested in that. And as far as my role, I think we're still trying to figure out what that niche is. We don't want to be duplicating what agencies are doing, but how can we complement that work and everything? So um, there's been all kinds of different things as far as my roles and what I've done. One of the things I'm pretty proud of, prior to my retirement and prior to COVID, Darren McAvoy helped to develop the Utah Prescribed Fire Council. And, like a lot of those committees during COVID, they kind of crashed. With that group, there was also a number of people that either took new jobs with other agencies or retired. So it kind of lost its flux, and then kind of reignited that council. And we've had a number of meetings. We just had a field trip the other week up in the Park City area, looking at both Lambs Canyon and Pine Brook HOA and their master association pile work that they've been doing. And we had a meeting last spring down near Price. So that's been one of the things that I've worked on as far as reigniting that group. Have found a lot of HOAs that don't really have, um, are seeking information and how can they work on creating firewise communities. So I've been working with a number of HOAs and communities, and I've got a good big project in central Utah. It's part of the FASTME project, the Fire and Smoke Modeling Evaluation Experiment, and that's a big landscape scale burn in an area of aspen that's largely been encroached by mixed conifers. So that we might even be burning by the end of this week, depending on what they ended up getting snowfall over the weekend. It was still snowing on the site yesterday. So, and other things I've been doing, working with Rio Tinto Kennecott to develop a fire management plan, just providing technical advice to some of the agencies have actually come back to ask me to provide some technical advice on some of their prescribed burns and wildfires. And then directly with Extension, as far as, Extension county assistant professors, I've had a number of them reach out to me. Sanpete County, their county director, was looking at doing some or has been doing some targeted grazing around a Boy Scout ranch or camp, and wanting some more information on that, or looking at if they're doing the right practice. In Sevier County, I did have a rancher that has an allotment on U.S. Forest Service lands that probably 30 or 50 years ago was chained, and wanting to look at how they could increase their production, because there's still a lot of that residual pinyon and juniper wood that's on the site. And then more recently, Grand County has reached out. They want to kind of do a repeat photography photo series of looking at historic photos and what's going on today. So those are some of the things. We've also seen a lot of agencies saying, we're really hurting for firefighters. How can you help us as far as recruiting the next generation of firefighters from the university? And that kind of ties in nicely with, again, I mentioned the USU Wildland Fire Club, co-advising with them. And we've taken them up to Yellowstone and had them down to Pine Brook pile burning. And just the other week, we went up to the Yellow Lake fire to look at, the command post that they have there and going up on the fire line and going out to the heli base. And within that, with the group and this next spring, we're actually going to be offering it for credit. We're teaching that course I mentioned earlier that got me started in fire, the S-130 Wildland Firefighter Training, the S-190 Introduction to Fire Behavior, and then there's a new course that's added onto that where that's required to get a what's called a red card to be qualified for firefighting, and that's the L-180 Human Factors of fire lines. So been working with the club to do that, and then with the Wildland Resources Department to do that. And then, continue doing some instruction with at the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise. And then I still, I think it keeps my qualifications up, but also keeps me current in wildland fire. I still go out with an incident management team out of Alaska. So those are some of
Wow.
the things that I've been working on.
You say some of the things as if it's like, this is kind of, I don't know, I'm not doing much. This is the list of that's awesome. I wanted to touch on something you mentioned about prescribed fires. So I mean, I grew up agriculture. Like I know that, you have to burn things sometimes and your neighbors are burning ditch, whatever. But what is a prescribed fire when you look at it from like a forest standpoint? How does that help the forest and what's the purpose of those?
Well, we need to look at, most of our forests throughout the West, and especially within Utah, are fire-dependent ecosystems. They developed out of fire being part of that ecosystem and the environment, and we've largely excluded fire from that environment. Both anthropogenic burning that was done by the indigenous populations that once inhabited much of Utah or all of Utah, and then also natural fires. So, we've also been suppressing, any new starts. So prescribed burning basically is bringing fire back into an ecosystem that depended on it and species that have adapted around fire. So by using prescribed burning, we're basically providing a natural process that once occurred, and in the meantime, we've also built our homes in those areas that once burned regularly. So we've in a lot of places we've got buildup of fuels around what we call the wildland urban interface, or where the eaves meet the leaves, and with that, um, you know if a fire were to occur, it could have detrimental impacts if, without treating around the community and that sort of thing, and creating a fire-wise community.
So fire is honestly necessary for the environment wisely, right? Like, so I mean, if a fire starts from a lightning strike, how do you determine the level that you need to put it out versus kind of let nature run its course? If I'm understanding, if fire's good for the environment, like safe, I don't know. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go
uh,
into looking into whether or not you should manage the fire or you should suppress the fire.
okay,
And, whether or not it was human caused and, an accidental or something that could have been prevented. In most cases, we're going to, not we, but the agencies are going to put it out. It
sure.
also depends
Okay.
on who owns the land and what their land management plan says and how they can manage that fire. The proximity, are you in an area that doesn't have a lot of development, or are you right next to a community?
Yeah.
And so you got to consider all those things. And if you're near a community, what actions have taken to firewise that community and that sort of thing. But usually, if you are looking to manage the fire, it's an area that it's not near development, so that the fire can move around. And also looking at the season of the year. If you get a fire start, in the middle of July, and we don't get the monsoonal moisture, you're going to have to be managing that fire potentially until the snow falls in October into November. So,
So a lot of forest firefighting is more managing than necessarily suppressing it when it's like out kind of, right? Is that my understanding?
yeah, that, or you may be managing one part of the fire that's going into a wilderness area while you're putting suppression actions or taking suppression actions on an area that has potential of burning into a community, or where cabins are located, or other values. And that's another thing we need to look at too, is the watershed health. If we don't want stand destroying type events going through a watershed that provides water to a community that, you know, could have detrimental impacts. And an example of that, the Dollar Ridge fire a number of years ago, probably about five, it's probably longer than that. But that fire occurred above Duchesne. Cost to suppress the fire were around $21 million. Well, Duchesne, because of the watershed issues and siltation that's come into the reservoir above Duchesne, they've had to spend $28 million in retrofitting their water intake and their water treatment plant, so that they're not having high silt levels within their drinking water, their culinary water.
Wow, I would have never thought of a forest fire impacting like a watershed. Like that connection. When you say everything's connected, you mean it. Like it all flows together. Um, so with that being said, what does a healthy prescribed fire or something, what does it do to our forests and why is it good for the forest?
Well, and it depends on the type of forest too, because different forests have adapted to different types of fire. So like your lodgepole pine type forest, your typical Yellowstone type forest, which we do have within Utah as far as lodgepole pine, that experienced stand destroying fires. It wasn't low intensity surface fires. So that ecosystem has adapted, like serotinous cones on the lodgepole that needs heat to release the seeds and that sort of thing. So that forest does require high intensity for fire, whereas like a ponderosa pine stand that we have in more of the southern part of the state, that has adapted. It's got really thick bark. The branches will self prune to some extent, so that forest experienced regularly, fire every 5 to 25 years, and we've basically excluded fire from those ecosystems for over 100 years. So in the meantime, we have white fir or juniper and pinyon that have come in the understory. So if fire does come through, it's going to be more of a high intensity fire versus a low intensity surface fire. So um, if we allow that, we could lose the whole ponderosa pine stand without treating it beforehand. So there's a lot of considerations that go into, what type of fire you want on the landscape. Of course, in general, you want more of a low intensity surface fire that's not going to impact the watershed.
That it just feels so crazy that these trees, they need what could be seen as some like super damaging, like they're meant to thrive in something that kind of gives them the opportunity to just keep doing their thing, which is so opposite of what we I think sometimes perceive forest fires to be. They're like, oh, look at all this damage. Like, I mean, it can get terrible, but it sounds like there's kind of beauty sometimes in having a little bit of hard time to get something better. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what it sounds like.
No, I think it's definitely, nature's not beautiful in a lot of regards, or processes within nature. And you do see, it's not like the Bambi movie where everything's all sweet and beautiful. Animals do get killed by predators, and you know and a lot of people think that wildfires are going to kill animals. Usually they have the gumption to get out of the area when there is a fire. But some of these large fires, do have some impacts to wildlife populations, and it also impacts their habitat. So what's good for one wildlife species may be better for a different species. So
No, that's okay. So, I mean, we hear all the time about wildfires that are happening like in the state or in even different parts of the country. And we sometimes might just brush it off because it's not affecting us like directly. But how do even fires in like a different um, state affect us here in Utah or even a different county?
well, I think there's actually a lot of good examples of fires within Utah impacting us, but from outside the state, the air quality issues, and we have seen that in the last, probably 10 to 15 years of fires in Oregon or California, or even the last 2 years, we've had some smoke come in from Alberta, Canada, and when we get northerly flows, so we are impacted by fires from outside the state, impacting air quality. It also impacts our firefighting resources, because resources that are based in Utah will be sent to those fires. So that reduces our resources here. That being said, they're not going to deplete all their resources here. They will keep a number of resources here for initial attack and that sort of thing. But we look at, I live in Pine Brook, a neighborhood outside of Park City, and 3 years ago, my neighborhood was evacuated because the Parley's Canyon fire, and I happened to be home from that for that fire. I was out with the Alaskan Incident Management Team on a fire in Oregon, got home, and then was actually reassigned to California, and that fire happened. And they asked if I could help out for a couple days on that fire. So, but I don't think people realize how close we came to losing homes in
Yeah.
that fire. And even just this last summer, there have been a number of fires within Utah. We had the Silver King fire down by Marysville in central Utah. People were evacuated from that. And even in July, we had I think it was called the Sandhurst fire by Ensign Peak and just above the state capitol that, folks in that neighborhood and just, in Salt Lake were evacuated because of that. And more recently, I mentioned the Yellow Lake fire. That's kind of interesting because that fire, we have not really had wildland fires of that severity, of that size, this late in the season that required an incident management team being brought in to manage the fire, and that did, there were numerous areas that were evacuated and area closures that impacted people that had hunts in the area and that kind of thing. So.
So what can somebody do to protect their home? Because I imagine most maybe of the remote fires are probably more cabins, right? People don't live there full time. Um, so what can we do to protect our homes and properties from like if a fire starts and we don't want to make it worse, I guess. So how do we protect our homes, I guess?
Well, I think, there's both, if you have a cabin or a home that you're there part-time or year-round. I mean, if you've built that in what we again call the wildland urban interface, you have a shared responsibility to take measures to protect that cabin. And there are, like the home ignition concept where, you should not have any vegetation within the first 5 feet of the structure, and 5 feet to 30 feet from the structure, very limited, maybe a tree or two. Not having wood chips around the base of the structure, not having firewood, a pile of firewood right outside your door, have it far enough away. And that home ignition zone actually goes to thinning out up to 100 feet around the home. So taking those measures, and if you have, doing different things to harden the home, and some of those are retrofits that you can put on existing homes, or if you're building a new home, taking measures. But it could be something as simple as putting screening around the your vents so that embers may not get into the house, or clearing the needles that fall on your roof, or if you had a wood shake roof, changing the material to a metal roof or an asphalt composite shingles, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things that you can do to protect the house, and you shouldn't expect that the fire department's going to save you. You know, Everybody thinks there's going to be an engine in their driveway, and we don't have enough engines in all of Utah to do something like that. So you need to take measures to basically protect the house and consider that no one's going to be there to protect it if there is a wildfire.
No, that's interesting. I live in the middle of Cache Valley, so it feels so far off, like for a fire to get down to where I am. But we have a lot of friends on benches, and so like talking to them about like you never know when literally lightning can strike, or I don't know, a campfire gone rogue, or even shooting, right? You just never know. So it's good to take precaution now. What do you think is something that people get wrong about wildfires?
Well, I think, and I can't say your particulars with your house and stuff like that, but I think a lot of people think that they're not exposed to wildfires. And I've been doing some work with the Marshall Fire in Colorado outside of Boulder, where over 1,000 homes were lost, and that happened on like December 30th, 2 years ago. And even myself going there looking at things, it's like I wouldn't have thought that house was at risk, and there were much higher risks of homes that were in the foothills, where there were ponderosa pine trees around it, or juniper or that. And I would have put a lot more concern on those, and the homes in the flats where the Marshall Fire, was in adjacent to grassland type community or vegetation, and like I said, over 1,000 homes were lost in that. So I think, a lot of people don't think they're at risk, and that there are a number of websites out there. The Utah Forestry Fire and State Lands has their URAP, which is Utah Wildfire Risk Assessment Portal, where you can go in there, plug in your address, and it'll tell you what sort of risk you're at. And there's wildfire.org, wildfirerisk.org, another site where you can see, am I really at risk? And maybe you don't think you're at risk, but when you really are. And
Wow,
just being
that's
aware of
yeah.
that.
We have to go check that out because we live kind of like by a marsh, which I don't know, I guess. I mean, growing up, we had a big old kind of pond. We called it Pelican Pond, and it was
Mhm.
just like full of dry stuff. And people often, unruly teenagers, would set it on fire for fun. And it
Uh-huh.
would like come right up to the banks of these houses and scar their lawn. But like we never figured like, oh, we live around a pond. We're never gonna like wildfires aren't gonna happen by us, that so it's good that I like those resources to go and check that out. Um
And I think at that
yeah.
Marshall Fire, I mean, there was one area where there was a little riparian area, a little stringer of cottonwood trees that, both sides, I mean, there was a park, a baseball field with, irrigated grasses on one side, the stringer of riparian that came through, and then just some natural grasses. And 10 homes were lost in this one little area where, and it becomes less, it goes from a wildland to starting a house, but then it goes from structure to structure to structure. So it's something to be concerned with,
Well, and be aware
even
of
if you're
it.
not. Yeah, definitely be
Yeah.
aware.
What starts most of our fires in Utah besides like the prescribed ones?
Um, you know, we're at about 40 to 50% of our fire starts are actually from lightning cause, so natural ignitions. But then everything from abandoned campfires to dragging chains to, target shooting is actually a fairly big cause within Utah as far as fires and especially exploding targets if people are using those. And there are
Oh,
places where
okay.
those are prohibited. And then, your fireworks too, especially, not as much around the 4th of July, but if we don't see monsoonal moisture, the 24th of July, things really start drying out. But fireworks in general are also a big one. So,
So as we're recreating, so we're big into camping, and I am like probably too anxious about setting a fire, like to the point where it is like sopping wet in my camp ring. But um, when we're recreating, what are things that we can make sure that we do to not start a fire? Camping, RV, or not RVing, we ride four-wheelers, um, target shooting, things like that. What are things that we can prevent?
well, definitely, everybody wants to have a campfire, and I enjoy a campfire myself, but making sure that you take measures to put it out. And, that includes, dousing it with water and stirring that material around um, before you go to bed, or especially when you leave the site. And then, even simple things like, where do you park? That ATV or your car, if the exhaust system is touching um, dried out grasses, that's another source of ignition. So
I would have never thought about that. Um, we're always very cautious because we go where it's not like a wildfire, like a developed campground. We're kind of up in like,
dispersed camping.
yeah, and there's rings like with rocks or
Yeah.
whatever, but um I'm always very paranoid about starting a fire. Like I'm gonna wake up in the middle of the night because we go camping up above Bear oh my gosh, Beaver Mountain with those huge tall pine trees, and there's just all this
Uh-huh.
kind of dead brush around. I'm like, we are gonna start a forest fire. Like, it makes me so panicky. But okay, awesome. Well, is there anything else you'd want to add about what you do or how people can work with you more and on their wildland management?
Always looking for folks coming out to, seek help as far as, if they've got a homeowner that has some questions. We've got a number of publications as far as Firewise landscaping within Utah that we can share. And we're looking at possibly redoing that one with kind of more of a Firewise, Waterwise landscaping twist to it. And um, yeah, been doing a lot of work with, some communities as far as helping them to secure some grants and that kind of thing. So have that available out there. And yeah, I think, like I said, this position is entirely new to extension and within Utah, and there are a number of states around Utah that have been developing similar positions. So, still trying to find that niche as far as what the needs are out there for the extension community and this larger state as a whole. And kind of went through a list of things that have been working on, but that doesn't preclude us on working on something else
Sure.
for folks.
Well, awesome. Thank you to everybody who joined us on Facebook Live. The recording will be posted. We'll end that live video. And thank you to everybody who will watch this recording later. Thank you.